Welcome back to Reimagine 2020. I'm Yonah Hochhauser, and today I'm glad to be joined by Canaan Linder, founder and CEO of Stardust. Canaan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Well, first off, you want to give our viewers a little background on who you are and how you got into blockchain technology?
Sure, will do. My name's Canaan. I actually grew up in the Bay Area, and entrepreneurship has always been in my background. In college, I actually did my senior thesis on blockchain, and as kind of an undergraduate, I was an indie game developer. Created games myself with a couple friends and published them online for people to play. After college, I was a software engineer at Bloomberg in New York City, and actually while I was there, we did a lot of blockchain stuff internally, talking with other employees, organizing events around blockchain. And I always wanted to bring blockchain to the gaming industry and figure out a way for players to play games based on this technology, but without having to know what the underlying blockchain technology was. And so that's why I built Stardust. We're the easiest API for any game developer to utilize blockchain technology.
Mm-hmm. And how do you guys accomplish that? I mean, people say blockchain and gaming, and I think it should be a good fit. And if you look at any technology, once gaming gets involved, that's where it gets the big push. I mean, if you look at graphic cards, I mean, are you kidding me? The evolution and push of graphic cards, CPUs, RAM, these have been greatly pushed forwards, and the higher limits have really been stretched out by gaming. Do you see something similar happening with blockchain, where if gaming does take off, it will push the technology forward?
Definitely. I think, in early 2013, 2014, other than drugs, gaming was the second biggest use case for Bitcoin.
Right.
And for that reason, I think when blockchain really hit its stride in 2017, 2018, people looked at blockchain applications in gaming first, even before DeFi. They said, wow, this is where early technology is absorbed, specifically by players in a younger generation. And I think once gaming really clicks with that kind of demographic and blockchain gaming specifically, we'll kind of be able to spread blockchain prolifically after that, as kind of the younger generation will understand it, and then it'll just be ubiquitous from there.
And when people first hear blockchain gaming, I know I did when I first heard blockchain gaming, I was a little bit confused. Like, is the game running? Is it being rendered on the blockchain? I mean, right now, that's not what happens. What does it mean, blockchain gaming today?
Sure. So we've gone in a couple different iterations. The first was CryptoKitties, where everything was completely on chain. Breeding, changing colors, having different stats, etc. Everything tracked. Then people started realizing that blockchain, at least many blockchains out today, aren't made for the kind of hardcore graphical computation that is required by a GPU. And so the whole game cannot be running on chain. And so what we kind of subscribe to, and many people subscribe to, is where the game logic is kind of handled off chain, but many of the NFTs and the underlying assets are still on chain. So people still gain that things like truly unique items, complete asset ownership, being able to take your item out of the game and go trade it on an exchange. But yet many of the heavy lifting is still done by the game itself.
And so where does Stardust fit itself into this ecosystem?
Yeah, so we are, for want of a better term here, an asset management system for NFTs on chain. So if I'm a game developer and I'm creating a game, all I do is, instead of putting items in my database for my own players to never own, I can then author them on the blockchain and have an easy way for myself to interact with them, give them to players, take them from players, facilitate trades for players. But those players can still own the items completely in their blockchain wallet if they choose to.
And as a developer, do I kind of have to develop this into my game from day one, or is this kind of like an API? I can just plug it in. I have my non-blockchain game, just plug in this API, and I'm set. I now have a good blockchain game.
Second, so we took a game that had about, I think in the last month, it was between around 50K monthly actives. Completely centralized game, been running for about 3 years. And we took it and put in our API and migrated them to a blockchain-based system in under 2 hours. So that's really, from a completely live game, what we're doing in that respect. And from the game's perspective, they really like it because it's the same back-end design as technology they're already using.
And for the user, does it change their experience, or do they have to, create a wallet? Do they have to now deal, with the blockchain, even if they're just gamers that come in a game, or is it merely that the blockchain is doing, doing the tracking, providing them, but on the user's end, he doesn't even know he's interacting with the blockchain.
Correct. That's exactly what we're doing. The user doesn't need to sign up for a wallet, no exchange, no Ethereum, and we can get into kind of what blockchain we've used. No big transaction fees. What happens when you sign up for a game is it's almost like a Coinbase type experience. You sign up and you use a username and password. You don't know the blockchain is there. You're just there to play the game, in Coinbase's case, buy some Bitcoin, that's it. Now, if you learn kind of what blockchain is and understand kind of what a secondary marketplace is from there, you can then transition from that completely kind of managed state, as we call it, into a completely decentralized state. And so you as the user have the choice, and we basically give you a toggle and say, hey, you don't know what blockchain is, we'll toggle it off and you'll be managed for now. But in future, easily toggle it on and you gain complete control of your items.
Wow, so it essentially turns the game into kind of like the centralized custody service for them. If they want to, they can then actually turn that off, go into I understand mode, and actually hold their key.
100%. Yeah, we call it a little bit more of a managed service because custody has some regulations surrounding it. Okay. Managed is when you sign up for the game, you have your own public key that's generated for you that the game owner doesn't have the private key for, but you actually give the game owner permission to manage your public key. So from that perspective, they're just managing, you give them the equivalent of OAuth 2 app permissions, for example, same as your iPhone. But when you want to revoke that, it's as easy as saying revoke and pressing a button.
And then, so, if the end user doesn't know, especially at the beginning, doesn't understand he's interacting with the blockchain, what is the benefit here for the game developer? Why would they utilize the blockchain? Why not just keep it in an internal database like they have been doing for so long?
Yeah, so I'll kind of explain what I first started with, kind of my core ethos, and then where I got to after talking with actual customers. So the first thing was, game developers want players to have true digital ownership, and they want unique NFTs they can mint on chain. Now, that's a great proposition for us who live in the blockchain world, but for a game developer who's only ever used a database, they don't really understand that language. It doesn't make them any more money. All they ask me is, how do I make more money from your system?
Right.
Now, the other kind of perspective here is blockchain allows people to move around disparate ecosystems. So there can be a marketplace over here, there can be a game over here, there can be something like Game Explorer over here, and even another service where professional players cryptographically sign digital items. Now, a game developer probably wants to tap into something like a revenue sharing secondary marketplace. And so we really come at the perspective to the game developer of, hey, we have an ecosystem of products we're building. Here's our API to tap into that. They want to do that. They understand how the marketplace, for example, makes them more money when players trade. And many of those benefits that are imbibed from the end user, such as true digital asset ownership and NFTs, et cetera, that comes along with it, but that's not the main sell for game developers unless they're using it as a marketing tool, which unfortunately at the moment, many people, especially younger, don't quite understand yet.
So they're actually seeing, it's actually an increase in revenue for them, for game developers to use this because it opens them up to a secondary market. You mentioned the Stardust marketplace. Explain to me a little bit how that works.
Sure. So yeah, and to answer your question, right now the average game developer on us has seen about a 10 to 15% revenue increase month over month. The way it works from our perspective is right now the game developer, when you sign up for the game, you're in that managed state. And so you get to play the game and easily understand it. Now, what happens is if the game developer, and again, we don't necessarily take all the power away from the game developer. So the marketplace is kind of like an opt-in system for them. Right now, our marketplace generates a pair code, and all you have to do is provide that pair code to the game developer. And what that does is it actually links your game account to the marketplace account. And therefore, on the marketplace, what you've done behind the scenes, and you still don't know you've done this, but you've made your marketplace account your actual decentralized wallet. Once you link a game to the marketplace, that marketplace becomes kind of your central decentralized wallet to which you can link every game on the Stardust platform to. So that's really how it works. We're kind of like a link-based system. In future, we'll probably have more white-labeled versions of our marketplace per game specifically. But as of right now, we use that marketplace as kind of like a central hub or a central wallet store for you to be able to link every game to and become your true digitally asset owned items.
Mm-hmm. And so essentially, if I'm a gamer and I have game A and game B, I can go to the marketplace and I can actually trade a project, an item from game A to game B, or is this more me and my friend both own the same game, the same two games, and we could swap items in between games?
So both, actually. We use kind of cash or Ethereum or any other currency kind of as the medium of exchange. But the marketplace becomes somewhere you can see every game that you've played, see all the items across every game, see all the information across all of your items across all the different games, and trade item to item, item to currency across any game you wish on our platform.
And is there support yet by the developer? I mean, obviously the developers have to support this. Is there support yet for inter-game items? For I buy a sword in game A, and then I could then trade it or ship it over to game B and use that same sword in game B?
So that's a little more of like what we'd call a multiverse concept, something we kind of see in the Ethereum world today. Many people are trying to do. That is definitely supported by our system, but at the same time, to actually physically support that item and have it show up as a sword in game, that is something the second game developer would have to implement. So it's a little more of a business to business system or a business to business agreement, but at the same time, it's vanilla supported by our system.
And I'm sure that, especially if it's an item, a visual item in game, that'd be a little tougher sell because they'd have to render it in their game. It has to be the same design language, and that's probably more of a headache. But I could see it actually being easier to sell as a perk, as a boost, a stat boost, where they don't actually have to render it in game, but rather it would be running in the background, affecting their character stats or something. Do you foresee that being, an easier sell to developers to actually implement, this multiverse?
Yes. So I think the multiverse being different games runs with it a lot of what we would call, and I think bringing from DeFi would be gaming arbitrage, which is, if I want an item in game A that I'm playing, that's also supported in game B, and it's much easier to achieve in game B, maybe I'll go over and play game B. Now, that's an interesting perspective because game A is like, hang on, we want you to stay in our game. And game B is like, we get more players. That's awesome for us. And so I do see it definitely being a push forward in terms of like gaming capabilities. But from kind of a business and a design sense and really coming down to like economic modeling, it really changes the kind of factors around that. And from there, it's a different economic model that we're going to have to explore. But I do think long-term it's beneficial.
Well, I mean, I think we could learn lessons from the cinematic multiverse. If you look at Marvel, they're not going to include, they have no incentive to include DC, or DC has no incentive to provide DC characters to the Marvel movies and vice versa, because they don't want to like you said, send their fans and their viewers to another platform. But there is the multiverse within the Marvel umbrella. So could you see the multiverse happening within a game developer? Look at the big game developers, Blizzard, Epic. I mean, you look at these big publishers and developers that have multiple games within their umbrella. Can you foresee that being the start of the multiverse where, blockchain technologies actually enables inter-item play within, under that one corporate umbrella, so they do have that economic incentive. They're not cannibalizing their own sales. Rather, they're incentivizing you to say, hey, I might not be willing to buy this item for this one game, which I know I'm going to beat in a week, I'll never touch again. But if I know I buy this one item in this game, and then now I could go bring it over to my other Blizzard game, do you foresee the developers being more on board for that?
100%, yeah. And we've seen kind of early, mostly with currencies like Robux and Roblox, you see kind of a global currency affecting everything in many different disparate games under the one umbrella. So we've already seen moves toward that. We haven't seen many items, at least personally I haven't, but we're already seeing that. And it's something people like. From a game developer's perspective, you're exactly right. It aligns completely with their model. Oh, I've played enough Fortnite, I'm gonna go play another Epic game. And then you can say, oh, I don't have to rebuy $1,000 of skins. Of course, Epic may want you to, but that's again, an economic model that they can then be interested in, of course.
Mhm. And can you tell me a little bit? I saw that you guys have Stardust Game Explorer. What is that exactly?
Sure. So as a block explorer shows you the data within all blocks on the blockchain, we have a little more of a game explorer that we see is a graphical representation of digital asset data. And unpacking that, what that means is it's an easy way for you to go type in an item, almost like a wiki page, see the item, see the stats, can more be created, what's the total supply, the price history. It's something that we're creating so game kind of developers and also players can really understand the kind of number data in a graphical format. It's a very easy way for them to also price items, which is very important.
Very cool. And you know, you mentioned before when you were talking about Ethereum, and then you mentioned kind of, you know, what blockchain is being used now. You know, Ethereum is congested, heavily congested because of DeFi, because of these extraordinary tools that are built upon it. Do you guys support many blockchains or a specific blockchain?
Yeah, so currently we're supporting a specific blockchain. We're actually in the kind of transition phase now, actually from Near Protocol to Solana. I can get into a little more about that, but we required a couple things from the underlying chain that we support. And first, I'll answer your question, why we only support one chain. And the reason is we work with game developers who don't know what blockchain is. They just want to tap into this ecosystem. And so giving them any sort of choice, hey, do you want to deploy to Ethereum or Near or Solana or Polkadot or Algorand or any of these, just confuses the hell out of them. And we want to keep it in a way that just says one click, deploy, headache free. Now, from the kind of chain perspective, we needed cheap transactions, no question, like 1/10 of a cent max. The reason for that is we generated over 1 million transactions last month. So obviously 2-cent fees up to $10 fees does not work for us. Two, because of that, we also imbibe that transaction cost for the end game developer. So they don't pay for anything on our system, at least not yet. And then the other thing we really needed out of one of these chains was kind of long-term transaction capacity. Which we don't see from Ethereum today, and Ethereum 2.0 being very far off. And so that's something we kind of looked into these, what I would call next generation chains in order to help us support.
And which chain did you guys move on to?
Solana is the one we're on right now. Yes.
Oh, very cool. And do you find that it does satisfy those requirements and it could scale, you know, if you right now, you know, you get a bunch of big game developers to come on, will Solana be able to scale or will it meet that same issue that Ethereum did, where it was a great blockchain, so many people went to use it, and then it couldn't scale?
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So Solana turns about 50,000 transactions per second. So we're pretty confident in the way they designed it. And actually, the main reason we looked into it at first was it's designed completely differently than any other chain, which gives it the ability to scale orders of magnitude larger than these other chains can. It also doesn't scale with sharding, which I know is a hot topic these days, but there are very big just composability issues with sharding when contracts live across different shards. And so for that perspective, we really liked Solana and what it brought to the table, and it's easily going to support you know, tens of thousands of transactions per second. I'll say, like, as a general industry, we're very early. And I think DeFi is almost outgrowing what we have in the industry today so far in terms of Ethereum's probably one of the best composable systems out there, but not for transactions per second. So because of that, we're really pushing it forward. And we're experiencing now, which is great, kind of the growing pains of being kind of a nascent industry, less than 5 to 10 years in the limelight.
I mean, because you brought it up, I'll just ask you. You wrote an article. Why does sharding suck from a builder's perspective? Why? What does sharding do? Because many people, you know, as the scaling solution, why does it suck? Yeah.
So I'll preface everything, which is, as a programmer, code is flexible, and so there are ways to get around these issues, always. But it's an ease of use and headache, and if you can get around them in a way that's not code, like not building on a sharded system, then you can very easily not have to deal with the future headaches and technical debt that sharding will bring. One of the biggest things with sharding is right now on Ethereum, everything lives on the same shard, for want of a better term. And so if I'm one smart contract calling another smart contract, I can assure myself that those are on the same shard, AKA, and that makes it very powerful in terms of transaction reversion. So I know I'm getting a little technical here, but what I mean by that is we look at the train and the hotel example. If I'm booking a trip and I want to book a train, and then after I book that train, I want to book a hotel, then very easily on one shard, I can say, book me a train and book me a hotel. And if the train doesn't book, the hotel won't book. And if the hotel won't book, then the train will get reverted so that I won't be left with a train and no hotel. Because obviously I don't want the train if I don't have a hotel. Now, when you're across shards, that's very hard to actually revert. And it doesn't revert actually without any help from the developer. And so right now, that reversion is all baked into Ethereum's core protocol. As soon as you get across shards, it's very possible that the train company lives on one shard and the hotel lives on another shard. And so the problem with that is I could very easily say, book me the train and then book me the hotel. But because they're on different shards, there's no way for the train to know about the hotel or the hotel to know about the train. And so because of that, I could end up with a train and no hotel. And as a programmer, there are ways using like hash time locks within your contract to get around that and verify that everything is passed or manually revert everything. But from an end developer perspective, that's very dangerous, because what happens if you book the train and then you book the hotel and then the hotel fails and you need to revert the train, but at the same time, the train is a malicious actor and says, we don't want you to revert the train anymore. And so you can't, and you're stuck with the train ticket. That only happens in sharded systems. And when you're on one shard or like an Ethereum type system today, that can't happen. And so from a developer perspective, as you get into these very, very complex systems that are very widespread and people need to interact with other ecosystems, you have a lot of smart contracts, it can get kind of dangerous and annoying from a developer perspective. So because of that, we look for a system that didn't imbibe those problems, I would say.
So how has Solana succeeded in scaling so effectively and efficiently with fast transactions without reverting to sharding?
Yeah, great question. So they have a couple very cool optimizations. The first I'll talk about is something actually Ethereum wanted to, but I don't think ever implemented. Solana calls it kind of C-level parallel processing. But what that does is if I'm sending you a transaction and we have two other people sending a transaction to each other, our transactions actually don't need to be processed in series because we are mutually exclusive, right? Like what we do doesn't affect what they do. And because of that, they can actually process, based on the number of cores, those transactions in parallel. The other thing they do, which is very different than Ethereum, but is how they scale so effectively, or one of the reasons, is they use an account creation system that is much more like a Linux file system model, which is very powerful when you look at how computing started. They work from a system that deals with every transaction, every account created in its different file, with its different metadata associated with it on a per contract level. And it actually is how the Linux file system works behind the scenes. And because of that, they're able to kind of store data and use that data so much more effectively than one of these EVM or WASM compatible systems right now.
And it's so interesting, getting your point of view, because you are a developer, you're a programmer, and so you kind of see under the hood of these various blockchains. Because as a crypto enthusiast, as a blockchain enthusiast, but without any technical knowledge myself, coding knowledge myself. So when I look at blockchains, I see it more conceptually. Ethereum has smart contracts. It has trouble scaling. But as a developer, as someone who actually needs these things, not just to make a transaction, but to actually build on it and make it work for yourself, for your customers, I'm sure you have a much better understanding of these blockchains under the hood. So as a developer, as a blockchain developer, when you look at the landscape a blockchains available today? And I'm sure it obviously depends on each use case, but right now, looking at it, do you think that there's a big disconnect between the overall cryptosphere sentiment on what blockchains are good and the developer understanding of, hey, this will actually work?
Yeah, 100%. And there are a couple things I'd attribute to that. Number one, and I've actually talked with a couple projects recently about this. We're in an interesting spot right now, having used Near Protocol and Solana, and are actually moving from one to the other, because they're kind of the two very interesting chains that a lot of developers right now are looking for as they kind of scale from Ethereum. And so the fact that we've worked at both on a very personal level, it leads a lot of people to ask us, a lot of technical questions about that and what's better, what's worse. What I'll say is that the mainstream perspective is very skewed because, number one, developers don't have the tools to try out every blockchain. The switching cost is just too great. Learning a new language, which sometimes you have to do, you just kind of have to make one choice and rip the Band-Aid right off. And you can investigate later, but investigating 3 or 4 blockchains at the same time doesn't really help. It doesn't work. And a lot of customers or products that just want to go to market are fine going to market on chains that don't scale because they have no market. And it's not worth thinking about that scaling before you actually have a customer base. And so I will say, yes, the general kind of viewpoint is very scaled to, indicators like, oh, what have VCs invested in? Where is the biggest project that I use on, right? Like, which coin has gone up the most? But from that perspective and from a tech perspective, going behind the scenes, developers are really confused on what chains to use. A couple of us on Twitter just got in a Discord group the other day, and there are pros and cons to every chain out there. And so from that perspective, we're really early in the process, and I think the mainstream crypto view is very skewed, and don't get skewed by coin market cap when the real technology is still in its infancy.
I mean, because you come from a gaming world, so I'll ask this question through those lens. If you look at the PlayStation, the PS4, the Xbox One, and even PC gaming's gaming, they have they have different processors. Some are more powerful than others, but for the and that affects the player's experience. Hey, I have a PlayStation. I like how the controller feels. I like how their PlayStation Network interface works. But for the developers, a big aspect is the developer tools. Each console has their own developer tools. It makes it easier or harder for developers to develop upon it. So similar with the blockchain, there are some blockchains that scale better. There are some blockchains that are more popular. There are some blockchains that have different use cases. But in terms of developer tools, which would you say right now is the blockchain that supports developers the most and makes it the easiest to develop on, regardless of that blockchain's capabilities?
Ethereum, no question. And as you said earlier, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Many of these tools are built by the community. Who has the biggest community? It's Ethereum. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And a lot of these chains have tried, but unfortunately kind of failed at attracting open source tooling on their network. And what has happened, it's actually very interesting because a lot of these open source tools are built on Ethereum. And the way these companies make money after building open source tools is by providing this as possibly a business-to-business service to other chains. And so there are there are services out there, like I won't mention, but that will sell you the ability to have a developer tool on your chain. And from that perspective, a lot of chains are, do we build this ourselves? Are we just going to end up spending a ton of money on this? Like, how do we jumpstart the community so that we don't need to be shilling out dollars or coins for everything that's built on our ecosystem? And so from that perspective, Ethereum today is unparalleled in the amount of tooling, the amount of support, and really what people don't, as a developer I have, but people don't realize is the number of Stack Overflow questions or Stack Exchange questions for Ethereum. Those are very helpful. If you have a question on Ethereum, 10,000 people have already tried to do that.
Wow.
But on these other chains and these nascent kind of ecosystems, I mean, we're left to ask that company for help, that is their foundation that is building the chain. And so from that perspective, it's a pain point that no one has yet solved, because no one has, 1/10 of the active developers that Ethereum has right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're right. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy where, that's where the developers are, then the users, and then that's where the help is. But all in all, I mean, this is a really, really young technology. I mean, depending how you want to pick the start, 10, 11 years old for blockchain. And so when you go to game developers, that's essentially your clients. Do they understand kind of what you're offering them? I mean, obviously all they care about is, end of the day, am I going to make money? Is this revenue? But when you go and you introduce yourself, hi, I'm selling you blockchain abilities. Do they understand really what blockchain is? Is it still so new that they just immediately associate it with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin with Silk Road, and Silk Road with drugs? Or because, they're developers, so they're probably a little bit more tech savvy and a little more in the know, they have an understanding of blockchain, you just have to sell them on how it helps them?
Yeah, good question. And so there are two main camps. There are the people who understand blockchain and its benefits. And then there are people that consider blockchain scams because they, bought into some ICO, BitConnect, whatever it was. And from that perspective, I don't know, honestly, many of the times who I'm approaching. And so my pitch actually doesn't really include the word blockchain. The one time it comes up, and a lot of the time it's almost the first, second, or third question that is asked of me is, what happens if you go out of business? Where does my data go? Are you going to lose my data? And I'm happy to say, no, we're using a decentralized technology in order to make sure there are, redundancy in your data and that it can't be lost even if we go out of business. Now, some people pick up on that and say, oh, like blockchain? And then I'm like, yeah, what do you know about it, right? Kind of opening up the floor to them from that perspective. But I don't lead with it because when I tried, I was getting a lot of no's, not because of me or our product, but mostly because people just were turned away by the technology and also the barrier to entry that is associated with it. Like blockchain, oh, I'm going to have it's going to take me a month to learn. Oh, well, my players are going to leave because they're going to have to download wallets. And so we really want to show oh, we're just a normal system. Oh, there's blockchain in the back that's powering this. Oh, that's awesome. So it's kind of our kind of, second cell, if you will, that really we have kind of a new generation of technology powering our system.
Well, I think that's really interesting, we're currently at the point where it does that, where just merely mentioning the word blockchain will cannibalize your sale, will cannibalize your pitch. And that definitely does not, I think it's very unfair. I understand why, but I find it very unfair because, like me and you, we understand the technology. We understand that that's not due to any real limitations of the technology, but rather more of a kind of a PR issue, if you will. So, do you think that will solve itself, that just, enough, it will become adopted enough, the technology will mature itself enough, and enough game developers will implement it that it will not become taboo anymore? Or do you think that the blockchain community really needs to put more effort into PR to really get the push off?
So it's an interesting question because blockchain and PR is kind of a negative connotation, and it's just a bunch of shilly projects, telling me why they're the best. From that perspective, though, I always liken it to databases. We don't hear the term database games at all, right? But we hear blockchain games a ton, right? Why do we hear that? Because right now, blockchain games are classified as a separate classification of games. And what we're obviously trying to do is show, you don't need a wallet or barrier to entry to play a blockchain-based games. They're just games. And at the end of the day, I think blockchain will end up being the standard that everything is built on, but at the same time, it won't kind of be called out as the standard. And I think to get there, more people, Stardust in gaming, but hopefully some other companies in other sectors will also bring blockchain technology in a layman's perspective to their end customer. And once that is done, I think that blockchain technology will catch on. And it won't be so much blockchain technology catching on as, oh, I'm just building, storing my games or data on the chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like, that is, simple a statement as, oh, I'm storing my game's data in a database. It won't be this like, oh my God, you're using blockchain, time to go, raise 8 figures type thing.
Yeah.
And I think once we get to that point and it's less sensationalized than maybe it is now that you're using blockchain, that it really just becomes, it becomes a business decision and a mainstream way to gain adoption for your game. I don't, and so I guess to one sentence answer your question, I think we don't really need PR. I think what we just need is more adoption. And with more adoption kind of comes that normality that, oh, I'm using blockchain for my game. Cool.
Yeah, I think you make a great point where it essentially is, a way of storing data. It's a database, but it's a decentralized database. It's a distributed ledger technology. That's DLT. And so that kind of makes it changes it up a bit, because if you look at, if you were offering a service to a game developer that was hardware, that was a physical solution, they needed fans for their servers or whatever, it would be tough to kind of take that solution and implement it in a different use case. But because you are creating a solution that stores data in a unique way, do you foresee that, Stardust's solution could be implemented not just in gaming, but you could kind of, write it, change it, or even apply it directly to another industry as well?
Yes. So I think from that perspective, and a lot of what we would call primitives in blockchain are very similar. At the end of the day, Stardust is an easy API to use, a way to put some data that you have onto the chain. And that data is very agnostic, meaning you can format that data in any way you want. We as a business have chosen to go into the gaming vertical and really built our products to serve that gaming vertical. But if you really look at just an easy API to put data on chain, that applies to many industries, art, right? Any sort of digital good that you want to create a storefront for. And so from that, music, anything. So right now we're focused on gaming, and I think that's super important from a business sense. Blockchain aside, business sense, you need kind of gaming as our vertical. Within it, we have our beachhead market of indie-based games. You really have to push forward. But yes, our technology that we're building is very agnostic in the sense that if I want to put some digital data on chain, our API is a great way to go about it. And so in future, maybe 3 to 5 years down the line, we'll definitely look into some of those other kind of verticals.
Well, I'm telling you already, I'm willing to sell my data for that battle axe that's available in that game. So definitely something to look into. But right now, how many games are currently utilizing Stardust?
So we have 6 games currently. We're currently going through what we would call probably Stardust v2. That will actually take our probably max player count that we can handle per game into the hopefully million player range, which is really our next step for us. As we do that, we are onboarding more customers, and as I said, our average integration time is about 1 to 2 hours.
Wow.
So because of that, it's very easy for us to acquire more customers, and really because of that, it's hampered almost how quickly we can onboard people, because you have normal blockchain technology, which takes a month to onboard. And so many companies you see start onboarding people because by the time they're going to finish, their product's going to be ready. And so what we're doing right now is we're actually building out our developer dashboard, which is going to be the one-stop shop for any game developer to see all the data about their game, their daily active players, the players within their game, be able to manage their players if they need to, tap into a marketplace, sell items, etc. And that product is coming probably by the end of September, and it's going to be our real main, I think, V2 launch that we're going to offer to all the developers we have on our waiting list currently.
And I think that you are right, perfect time, perfect place. Because right now, in the past couple of years, we've seen a major shift in the business model of games, where it went from pay $60 up front for a CD, and that's it, and that's all the developers are going to get, to this shift because of the success of battle royales, of free-to-play battle royales like Fortnite and PUBG and many others, where you see this shift now where it's in-game transactions. It's microtransactions, in-game transactions, freemium gaming, where that's the target, that's the market you guys are going for, where you're managing those in-game purchases. Does what you do work exclusively in that model where developers want to track the in-game purchase items, or could it also work in a traditional game where you're not paying for the items, but just developers want to track what items users have?
100%. So, I mean, we call it, at our base, we're an asset management system for game assets. And so a game developer, regardless of how they are, whether they're the freemium model, which is what we'd call it, that microtransaction model, or the $60 upfront model, our system works great for either. Now, I think it works a little better right now for that freemium model. But that being said, we are in an interesting point where iPhone apps, the majority of them, I think almost all of them now in the gaming sense, are free. And so that's definitely something that we see in our model being helped, right? We want to make them more revenue per sale of item in their game. But at our core, we're a place for them to create items and manage those items, the dashboard for developers. And something also interesting to mention is keep an eye on how, I know Epic, right, with Fortnite has, it's pennies compared to Apple, right? But there's a huge court battle going on right now over the basically monopoly Apple has in its iOS payment system within apps, taking 30%. Google not far behind. And I'm kind of sitting here saying, wow, this could be a huge opportunity for any kind of embeddable payment system within apps if Apple does lose. I don't think it's going to happen very soon. But I think so far as looking at blockchain technology and how it applies to games and specifically tracking in-game purchases, if that was ever able to be applied to mobile, in conjunction with Apple's system, that could be huge for this industry and really turn the whole blockchain gaming industry from zero to hero very quickly, as we've kind of seen with DeFi, earlier this year.
Well, I mean, that's the dream, is to get from that zero to hero. But right now, because of a number of reasons, including that technology being so new, it's still being developed. I mean, you're at the forefront of your field, and it's still so fresh. And also, on top of that, like you mentioned, when you're going to developers, you don't even mention the word blockchain because of that bad connotation. But let's take a hypothetical for a second. Let's say, what does that hero look like? Let's say that hypothetically, you get Ubisoft, EA Games, and Epic Games in a room. They all agree, we want to do this. We want to go together. Stardust, we're giving you an unlimited budget. You have 5 years to work on it. And essentially, what does that dream marriage of blockchain and gaming look like for the gamer if you didn't have to worry about budget, if you didn't have to worry about buy-in from the developers, if they all got together? What does that dream blockchain gaming look like?
Yeah, great question. And I think there are many ways that could go. And I think one of the things you mentioned earlier, so far as the multiverse, is very prevalent in that system. Right now as a game developer, you have so much, as a gamer, you have so much sunk cost. You sink 1,000 hours into FIFA, and when you go start playing in Fortnite, you are you spent zero time. And yeah, you'll have to learn the game. You'll always have to learn the game. But if there was some way to transfer all that sunk cost from one game to another, or all that sunk money, right, or sunk time, whatever you want to call it, from one game to another, I think that's really how we need to design these systems. And so, as you said, kind of the multiverse ecosystem becomes one and the same, right? I am playing a game as part of a larger multiverse instead of just as a single game. Now, those are kind of, from that perspective, that is a huge change to the developer model, right? And I think that is less of a, business, that is a business decision. And so that's why we think it's really going to start with the indie game developers, the longer tail solution. But one thing I'll mention for the indie game developers, which is, I think, very interesting, especially if they had those big guys in the room, and something you talked about in the movie industry, is IP. These characters right now only exist in one game. And I think one of the other things that's huge in this multiverse concept for developers, not players, is developers can have ways to license IP from people like, Niantic or Nintendo, right, with Pokemon, that they couldn't have before. And so, for example, I want to build a game. It's got 100,000 players. I'm two people and I could never I could never get a Pokemon license. But if that license is built on chain, I can then license that IP per player cost. So I can pay, 1/10 of a penny per player to have Pikachu in my game or something like that. And so I think from many different levels, right? The multiverse for the big guys, code IP, or IP licensing for the smaller developers, the players having the ability to not sink a ton of cost into one game and then not want to play a second game because of it. I think all of that kind of together is where this next stage, like the hero phase, should you say. It's hard because these are all disparate things that you need everybody together to agree on. And it's why blockchain technology, unfortunately, catching on is going to maybe take another 5 years to be huge in this space. But, it's moving in the right direction, and all it takes is time, and this will happen.
Well, I'm very excited to see that happen. And I appreciate the work that you're doing to push it forward. Canaan, thanks for joining us. And I can't wait for the next 5 years brings for blockchain and gaming, and hopefully we get that multiverse as well. Thanks for taking the time. And for all of our viewers at home for Reimagine 2020, I'm Yonah Hochhauser. Thanks for watching.